Hi, everyone. I hope you've all been having a wonderful, wonderful day. The conference started quite early already, so I'm grateful that you're still taking the time to dive deep into a topic I think that is really exciting, which is decentralized biotech. Hi, everyone. My name is Kohlhaas. I'm the founder and CEO of a project called Molecule Protocol. I first got into biohacking around the age of 18, 19, and I joined lots of online communities that were essentially exploring analogs to compounds. There was open insulin communities that were essentially looking for alternative treatments, or open cancer research communities. And these were essentially all little like Reddit communities, like subgroups that were forming to look for alternatives for drugs that they simply couldn't access or that they couldn't afford. And I found that really fascinating because it was a way of doing open source drug development. And I then started looking into how does big pharma work and how long does it actually take to bring drugs to market today. And I started realizing that there's an enormous divide between what people need and people's rights to access to medicine and what pharma actually provides us today and the way that pharma works. I first learned about Bitcoin in 2013, then quickly learned about Ethereum, was really fascinated by the open source software design that permeates blockchain communities. Then did quite a lot of work around data marketplaces, essentially figuring out how enterprises can share data to make it more accessible for people to do computation on. And then eventually had an aha moment where I was like, hey, cool, what if pharma worked much more like an open source marketplace as opposed to the industry that we know today? Cool, I'm going to jump right to it. So what's the problem? So today, most early stage therapeutics are actually not developed in big pharma, they're developed in academia and in biotech startups. And there's typically a stage there that is called the valley of death in pharma, which means that many of the great discoveries that are done in universities or even in smaller biotech companies actually never make it to the clinic. They never make it to market. And that's because the biopharma space is kind of pervaded by intransparency, and the cost of kind of doing business in pharma or getting funding and kind of capturing your IP is extremely high. So we find this stage, which is called the valley of death, in the early stages, and there's just kind of not enough things actually getting into the funnel. And then many drugs fail as they reach these further stages. And because the market is so closed, that essentially means there's a lack of available treatments that actually do reach patients in the end. And then those treatments are very expensive for patients today. So this process typically happens within one company, but it's also how the entire industry operates. And so we started asking ourselves what would happen if intellectual property as an asset class was moved out of companies and into the public domain, kind of enabling anyone to access that intellectual property and to begin working around it, to begin transacting in it. And if you think about how intellectual property works, it's really a monopoly that's granted by the government or the state in order for one organization to kind of capitalize on that innovation. But what IP and patents actually do is they encapsulate innovation within one company and they disincentivize anyone else to work on it. And in many ways, the pharma industry today is kind of similar to the software industry in the 80s and 90s. Maybe some of you remember buying like a Windows CD to install a new Windows operating system, or even Microsoft Word with a long like CD key that was actually physically on the CD. You had to enter it. And then think what open source software has really done to the software industry. Most of the apps that we download today on our phone are free. There's no like key that you need to enter. You don't go to a store. And pharma in that way really still operates in that 80s, 90s software model. And so we think there's a better way, and there's a way to potentially make medicine as freely available as we download our apps on our phones today. Cool, so at Molecule, we're on a mission to really decentralize drug development. And at a very high level, we're building a digital marketplace for biopharma IP. So kind of like an OpenSea for biotech IP. So these are different research projects from different universities that are listed on our platform, as well as biotech companies. And so we've kind of built a platform that is a mix between a ResearchGate and an OpenSea. So our mission here really is to make these university projects, these biotech projects, publicly fundable and move them into ownership in the public domain. So we solved a really hard thing. I don't know, maybe some of you know the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And so what we built is really this IP discovery marketplace, where we're now linking NFTs with real-world legal rights and secure data access control. And on the other side, what we started building is a governance and financing app layer that can operate through DAOs that essentially allows these assets to now natively go into Web3 and be collaboratively developed. And so maybe some of you know Flamingo DAO or what's happened in the NFT art space. So quickly, like NFT artwork emerged, and now already today we have an entire space or industry of funds that formed around this, building portfolios. There's DAOs that are curating IP, that are curating artworks and NFTs, like Flamingo DAO, for example. And so we asked ourselves, what if there was a Flamingo DAO for diabetes, or a Flamingo DAO for Alzheimer's research, or for cancer research? Essentially, DAOs being able to fund and co-own intellectual property on behalf of their members, and to actually curate the IP and openly work on it. So this is a high-level overview of our tech stack. So essentially the way that we're designing this market is it's a market with a supply side and a demand side. And the supply side essentially consists of researchers that want to develop their IP, and they upload their IP and data into our system. We then attach the IP to an NFT, which we called an IPnFT. And then that IPnFT can now travel into what we call Biopharma DAOs, or biotech DAOs. And that's what connects kind of the funders and the researchers together. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about one of the first biotech DAOs that we helped launch earlier this year, which is an organization called Vitadao. And then I want to explain to you how Vitadao can actually now transact and fund open research and transact in IP NFTs. So Vitadao is focused on the decentralized funding and governance of longevity research. And longevity research is a really interesting field. It's one of the final frontiers if we think about life, or medicine more broadly. So longevity research is essentially developing many new approaches to medicine. And it might fundamentally revolutionize medicine, because if we can slow down the process of aging and the onset of certain diseases, it really would allow us to redefine what it means to treat people. Because if instead of treating the diseases that come when we age, we treat aging itself as a disease, that could fundamentally redefine how medicine works today. And the longevity space is very interesting because it has a very high, let's say, overlap with the interest in crypto for some reason. It has a very high product market fit in the sense that there's many, it used to be quite a fringy, let's say, fringy research industry. And yeah. Okay, so I really like this quote from Nick Johnson, who asked, what's the single most impactful thing that a DAO could do with $1 million today? And as we looked at biotech and medicine more broadly, we realized, hey, one of the most single impactful things for us is aging. So we started building a community around funding aging research and then democratizing ownership of new aging therapeutics. And so Vitadao is a decentralized collective funding early-stage longevity research. Its mission is to extend human lifespan and health span by researching, financing, and then commercializing longevity therapeutics in an open, accessible, and democratic manner. So the primary funders of actually longevity therapeutics for the past 5 to 10 years used to be billionaires, frankly, because they quickly realized that, hey, what's all this money worth if my life ends at a certain point? But there's a danger here, because if billionaires become older and older and preserve their wealth continuously, you don't have a redistribution of wealth in society. And also longevity therapeutics wouldn't be widely accessible to the general public. So for us, this is a perfect use case actually for a DAO to make longevity therapeutics owned by the public domain. And so now Vitadao and its members are nurturing and developing the intellectual property, the licenses, and the data sets that result from the projects that it supports and funds. And now a big question is, how can a DAO, a full on-chain entity, own real-world biotech IP? And this is really what we've been working on almost for the past 1.5 years at Molecule. So we've developed something called the Biopharma IPnFT. And for us, this is a really big first case of moving NFTs beyond art into the real-world public domain. So one thing we asked ourselves was, what if what NFTs did for artists and musicians, what if we could do the same revolution in the sciences? The speed of innovation in medical research through that could really be propelled. And so what is a Biopharma IPnFT? So for us, it's a new fundraising mechanism for early stage research, but it's also a new ownership mechanism. So, and it consists of two components. One is a new technical framework that allows to combine NFTs with federated data storage and then with access control around that federated data storage. So federated data storage in this use case essentially means if a lab or a university is performing work or research, the data can actually stay on site. But now the NFT holder, and only the NFT holder, has access to that data and can grant other party access to that data. The typical process around this is literally sending around PDFs or granting you access rights to kind of the raw data. The industry has evolved very little. And so this is a mechanism where you can now trade all research data encapsulated in a specific project. And then on the other side, it's a new legal framework that utilizes sub-licensing agreements and essentially enables on-chain entities to hold IP. So this is the more detailed technical anatomy. If you're actually interested in this, we have a lot of blog posts and articles on our Medium that go deeper into this. But so as I just explained, essentially it's a legal contract that can contain the identities, the name, the physical address of the contracting parties. So in the first case, this would, for example, be the University of Copenhagen. And on the other side, it actually contains the wallet addresses or let's say the smart contract addresses of the countersigning party. So the way that this IPnFT works is it's essentially a legal agreement that is entered between two parties the moment that a transfer or a purchase of that NFT happens. And then on the other side, it's the actual NFT smart contract, and then it's the metadata JSON that's stored on Arweave, and then it's the encrypted IP and patent that is stored on Filecoin. So parts of this IPnFT are open, but the IP is not actually revealed. The IP is only revealed to the two engaging parties, but it can now be open to many more parties if those parties choose to do that. Okay, and so now what is Vitadao doing with these first IPnFTs? So Vitadao now owns the intellectual property assets that result from all of the projects that it funds. Members contribute work or funds to join Vitadao as an organization. And now Vida holders help curate and govern its IP. So in the long run, what an organization like Vitadao could do, it could essentially look through, the upcoming projects that are coming here, and it essentially works with those projects and helps curate them and then bring them to market. So the typical funding range that Vitadao is currently providing is between $50,000 to $1 million. $50,000 for, let's say, very smaller academic grant-like projects, and then upwards to $1 million for larger projects. The focus is really on early stage, high risk, high reward projects. And we attempt to make very quick funding decisions that are ideally much faster than current industry processes. We launched Vitadao through a Gnosis auction and with a fair launch mechanism, essentially ensuring that in the early stages of the organization, it's immediately distributed to its members. So essentially what happened was a Gnosis auction that raised, I think, just over 2,500 Ether. And that's currently now in the Vitadao treasury and is valued at, I think, just over $10 million. I think Ether actually just popped, so it's probably more now. The organization is holding most of its assets at the moment in Ether. And so that funding is now being openly distributed to projects that apply to Vitadao and to its community.
This is just a depiction of what the overall ecosystem looks like. So members can contribute funds or work. They receive Vida tokens in return. And then they curate all of the assets and the data that comes into the organization. Just a very brief overview of the structure. So you essentially have the members of Vitadao. Then you have different working groups that actually operate the DAO. So there's a deal flow working group, a longevity working group. There's a legal working group. So now these are all working groups that are helping us, at a high level, actually craft these IPnFTs, encapsulate the right data into the projects, and then ensure that, that the funding goes to the researchers. So this is actually an example of one of the first projects that Vitadao, as a biotech DAO, voted on. So this was a project with the University of Copenhagen and at the Scheibe Knudsen Laboratory that is exploring 10 unique molecules for their life-extending properties. And so if any of those molecules are a hit, Vitadao now fully owns all of the IP around that research and can start developing an IP or patent strategy around it. So this proposal actually passed with an 88% yes, a 12% no. It was one of the first VDPs that Vitadao discussed. And so this is what it looks like on the Vitadao front end. Vitadao is essentially a Moloch v3 implementation that we built with a native governance token attached. And so this is actually now what happens in the back end. So this is the research lab in Copenhagen. This is what the Copenhagen project looks like on our platform. So anyone can now discover this project and also begin potentially engaging with that research team. Yeah, so this is the research team. Then they gave regular updates, what's happening in the lab as soon as the funding started, which is really cool. So we're developing entirely new ways that research teams and laboratories can directly interact with patients. So for example, so in this case, these guys are developing longevity therapeutics, but this could be a similar case for a diabetes community, for example. So allowing a diabetes community to directly interact with a research team developing insulin. And then the scientists are actually now in our Discord. There's a specific Discord group for them. They actively engage with the community, and they've become a part of this DAO. The research team actually also has governance rights in the organization. And it's a really interesting new way for them to actually openly engage with the community that is very excited about their work. Very quick outlook how this has been going. So Vitadao currently now, it's only existed for about 4 or 5 months publicly, but it already has deal flow of 50 to 60 very high quality longevity projects. 10 to 20 of them are with leading academic labs across the world, where we're now working on turning those into further IPnFTs. Then Vitadao has also been approached by many longevity startups from pre-seed to A-series that want to openly work with the organization and engage with it. And those startups are actually now interested in purchasing the IPnFTs that Vitadao is developing. So actually now offboarding the IP again. Then we're also getting deeper and deeper into biotech tokenomics. So actually exploring biotech IP mining. The protocol itself over time curates IP, and in that sense is mining IP. Vitadao's kind of TVL over time, if you think of it in DeFi terms, will be a function of the amount of IPnFTs that it actually holds in the organization. And this is also something that we're very actively looking at Molecule, is the next step for us would be to fractionalize ownership in the individual IPnFTs. And then you essentially start having a curation market around these research projects that are coming through our platform. Cool, I think I'm already over time. Thank you guys so much. I hope you had a wonderful day, and I'll be here for any questions. Thank you.